The desert had a way of making every day feel like the last one before the world forgot about you entirely. Roy Kepler preferred it that way. He sat outside his workshop, a corrugated metal box that had seen better decades, nursing a cup of something that claimed to be coffee but tasted like motor oil mixed with regret. The sun was doing its usual impression of a giant angry flashlight, and the only sound was the wheeze of his cooling unit struggling against entropy. Then the sky split open with a shriek of violet light. Roy dropped his mug. The liquid hissed into the sand as something massive tore through the atmosphere, trailing fire, and a sound like reality being unzipped. It wasn't a meteor. Meteors didn't course-correct mid-fall or emit harmonic frequencies that made his dental fillings vibrate. The craft, sleek and silver as a knife, slammed into the hardpan 200 meters from his workshop with enough force to rattle his toolbox off the bench. "Well," Roy muttered, standing slowly, "that's new." Smoke rose in lazy spirals from the crash site. He grabbed his scanner, a battered device that was mostly duct tape and prayers, and approached cautiously. The ship was unlike anything in the databases, all flowing curves and panels that seemed to shift color in the light. A hatch cracked open with a pneumatic sigh, and she emerged. Roy stopped walking. She looked human. Completely, distractingly human except for the ears, elongated and swept back, tapering to delicate points that would have made an elf jealous. Her clothing was form-fitting, iridescent fabric that probably cost more than his entire workshop. She surveyed the wreckage, then turned to him with eyes that burned with barely controlled fury. "You," she said, her accent lilting and strange. "You will repair this." Roy blinked. "Hi, hello, welcome to Earth, I'm Roy, and wow, you're having a really bad day, aren't you?" Her expression could have flash-frozen nitrogen, now human. He raised his hands in surrender. "Right, okay, let's see what we're working with." He circled the ship, scanner chirping unhappily. The propulsion system used principles that made his head hurt, something involving folded space and quantum harmonics. When he pried open an access panel, his heart sank. A crystalline core, fractured beyond recognition, pulsed weakly with dying light. "So," Roy said carefully, "good news and bad news. Good news, your ship is absolutely fascinating. Bad news, this component doesn't exist on my planet." Her face transformed into something volcanic. Sareen's voice climbed octaves Roy didn't know human or alien vocal cords could reach. She unleashed a torrent of words in her native language, each syllable crackling like electrical discharge. Roy caught phrases that sounded musical and beautiful, which made the obvious cursing somehow worse. "Look, I get it, you're upset." "Upset?" She whirled on him, those pointed ears actually quivering with rage. "Your primitive world lacks the basic infrastructure for stellar navigation repair. Your sun is offensively bright, and you," she jabbed a finger at his chest, "you are incompetent." Roy held up his grease-stained hands. "In my defense, nobody told me aliens were coming. I would have studied harder in quantum mechanics class. You know, if we'd had quantum mechanics class, which we don't, because we're primitive." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "This is not amusing, human." "Little bit amusing," Roy muttered. "You could always hitchhike to the next star system. Thumb's a universal gesture, right?" He demonstrated, grinning weakly. Sareen's expression suggested she was calculating exactly how much force would be needed to launch him into orbit without a ship. Then, abruptly, she went silent. The fury drained from her face, replaced by something calculating and deeply unsettling. She studied him like he was a complicated equation she'd just figured out how to solve. Roy's grin faltered. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "In my culture," she said slowly, precisely, "failure to complete an assigned task brings dishonor to both parties, the stranded and the one who fails to provide aid." "Okay, but I didn't exactly volunteer for this. There is, however, a legal remedy." She straightened, composure returning like armor sliding into place. "A provision in our code for unexpected planetary strandings." Roy didn't like where this was going. "What kind of provision?" Sareen met his eyes with absolute seriousness. "Marry me, human." Roy laughed. It came out high-pitched and slightly hysterical. "Good one, you almost had me there." He waited for her to crack a smile to reveal the joke. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Oh, you're serious." "Completely. We just met like 15 minutes ago. You called me incompetent twice." "Factual observations," she said crisply. "The marriage is legal necessity, not romantic declaration. By binding yourself to me, you grant me temporary citizenship rights on your world, and I am spared the dishonor of abandonment." "Simple," Roy's brain was doing computational gymnastics. None of that is simple. That's the opposite of simple. That's complex. Incredibly, horrifyingly complex. Sareen crossed her arms, and for the first time, Roy noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Do you accept or do you not? Roy paced in circles around the crashed ship, hands on his head like he could physically hold his thoughts together. This is insane. You realize this is insane, right? We don't even know each other's favorite colors. Irrelevant information, Sareen said, though she was already moving toward the damaged vessel, retrieving something from an intact compartment. She emerged holding a device the size of a deck of cards, its surface rippling with embedded light. Blue-green spectrum, wavelength approximately 500 nanometers, if you must know. That's really specific. Roy stopped pacing. Mine's red, just, regular red. Primitive choice. She activated the device, and a holographic display erupted into the air between them, covered in flowing script that hurt to look at directly. Standard Interstellar Bonding Contract, Article 17, Subsection 4. Emergency Provisional Pairing. Roy squinted at the symbols. They seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking directly at them. I can't read that. For all I know, it says you get my kidneys. Your organs are worthless to my physiology. Sareen swiped through several screens with practiced efficiency. The contract is straightforward. Mutual obligation of protection, shared legal status, dissolution available upon return to recognized space or after one solar cycle. 1 year, Roy's voice cracked. You're planning to be stuck here for a year. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify, but it looked like fear. The contract allows for earlier termination under specific circumstances. Roy moved closer to the hologram, trying to make sense of it. What circumstances? Actually, bigger question, why do you even need this? You said dishonor, but there's something else going on here. Your ship didn't just malfunction, did it? You were running. Sareen's jaw tightened. You overstep. You're asking me to marry you? I think I've earned some overstepping privileges. He softened his tone. Look, 15 minutes ago you were ready to vaporize me with your eyeballs. Now you need a legal contract with a random human. What aren't you telling me? She turned away, those distinctive ears angling back. There are political complications in my home system. I may have left somewhat urgently. Somewhat urgently. Like forgot to pack a lunch urgently, or more like people are trying to kill you urgently. The latter category would be more accurate. Roy let out a long breath. Fantastic, so I'm not just getting a wife, I'm getting enemies, plural. Possibly armed. Highly armed, Sareen confirmed, then seemed to catch herself. But the likelihood of them tracking me to this backwater is minimal. Your planet isn't even properly cataloged. Hey, we're on some maps. Outdated ones. She met his eyes again, and this time he saw it clearly, the vulnerability beneath the arrogance, the desperation she was trying to hide. I am alone here, human, stranded on a world I do not know, hunted by those I once trusted. The contract is all I have. Roy didn't sleep. He sat on the roof of his workshop watching the stars, wondering which one Sareen had fallen from and whether her enemies were already looking down at him. His life had been simple, lonely maybe, but simple. Now he was considering marriage to an alien woman he'd met during what was objectively the worst day of her life. By sunrise, he'd made his decision. He found her by the ship, hands deep in the ruined propulsion system, trying to coax life from dead crystals. Her shoulders were slumped in a way they hadn't been before, the arrogance stripped away by exhaustion and reality. I'll do it, Roy said. Sareen turned, something like relief washing over her features before she mastered it. You will accept the contract. Temporary contract, he emphasized. Just until you can get in touch with your people or figure out another way off this backwater. He managed a crooked smile. Besides, I've always wondered what alien marriage ceremonies are like. Do you have a weird uncle who drinks too much and tells embarrassing stories? We do not have uncles, we have brood coordinators. The corner of her mouth twitched, and yes, they drink excessively. She activated the holographic device again, and this time Roy didn't flinch away from the symbols. She guided his hand to a glowing panel, her fingers cool against his skin. Repeat after me, Kelshara Nim Valter. Kel, Shara Nim Valter, Roy stumbled through the syllables. Close enough. She spoke her own vows in that musical language, then pressed her palm flat against the hologram. Place your hand here. The moment their palms